Workers at South Africa's post office are in for a rough ride after the National Postal Service announced its intention to lay off 6,000 employees. The utility clocked up more than 2.2 billion rand in losses last year, and many of its 1,500 branches and 690 agencies are unable to provide services and have been forced to close.
The latest development comes a week after the company called a meeting with unions to discuss a 40% salary cut or reduce hours of work with all key stakeholders in attendance. The South African Post Office, which relies on government bailouts to stay afloat, needs an amount which exceeds 12 billion rand for it to be rescued. Joining us to discuss this further is the Secretary General for the Communication Workers Union, Aubrey Tshabalala. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning to you and good morning to our viewers at home.
All right. Now let's talk about, the reason that has been given for these layoffs. It feels like there's not enough money to continue to cater for these workers. But are those the only reasons that you've heard so far?
Well, those are only reasons that we've heard that based on the historical background, the debts that have been in South African Post Office come to a magnitude of over 8 billion rands, but the recent one that they've talked about of over 2 billion rands, which is an additional, it's made precisely because of the policy decision at government level, which was to remove the post bank out of post office. As a result, post office had now a debt to pay its own brainchild, which is South African Post Bank. So it owes Post Bank over 2 billion rand. So most of the challenges that are there are really attached to the legislation and the policies which bottleneck the business of South African Post Office. That's why you see the striving of the private sector in the same postal courier market, because the post office has been bottlenecked.
All right, now let's talk about the situation of the postal service. It's been deteriorating for a long time. Would you say that, what would you say is the cause of this? Is it poor management? Or is it the staff? And do you think that these retrenchments were a long time coming?
Well, there is a number of factors that leads to the deterioration of the South African Post Office. One of them is maladministration, which as workers, as the union, we have been knocking very hard at the doors of the public protector, to a point where the public protector found out that all the allegations, we made 9 allegations, 8 of them were correct. And he found us to be on the right side of the law. That was way back around 2014, 2015. And up until this time, there's no consequence management with regards to that. That's the first point. But the second point as well, the post office has been under a management that was not focused in terms of the futuristic of the institution. One of the things is that you need to move with the technology intervention. That has not been forthcoming. And when that is not happening, it means that the services of South African Post Office are inefficient in terms of fast delivery, efficiency, and security for that matter. So those are the things that made the customer base shrink. But the third point, which is also important, relating now to these retrenchments, Post Office has been closing branches in various parts of South Africa, in the urban area and in the rural areas. When you close the branches, you limit the network of the postal and courier services. When you limit the network, eventually it means that your revenue decreases. And as a result, it will appear as if your staff is now bloated, because the salary will remain, but the revenue will decrease. But we also have to highlight that since 2019, there's been drastic shift in terms of the employment number of workers. We know that the reports have been saying post offices having 19,000. As we speak now, we have 12,700 that we'll be focusing on. So already you have almost 45% of the staff reduction in the last 4 years. So we think that the current cut of jobs will lead to a very devastating outcomes, not only for workers, but for communities and the post office itself, because it won't be able to execute its functions.
Well, now I want to talk about, because a few months ago I saw that the communications minister had appealed for a 1.6 billion rand bailout to assist the post office, of course, to keep its functions going. Is the government interested in giving, the post office any money? Is there any conversations about giving them, bailout for the post office? And also, have there been things maybe people are using less and less of the post office these days? Is there ways that maybe new private delivery services have come into South Africa that have made the post office less relevant?
Well, to answer your question, firstly, we partly engage with the Minister of Communication and Digital Technology as a union, and we've also engaged with the Treasury. And we've all agreed in principle that we need to have a meeting that will try to mitigate the challenges that Post Office is facing. And you are quite correct about that 1 billion. It was going to come out of the quarterly budget of last year. But we said that there must be a program on how do we then have a program of financial injecting finances into the Post Office. So that is on the pipeline, but we think that the government is moving on a very snail pace because things are moving so fast on the other end. And we think that there should be more commitment from the state because it's through the state intervention and that led to these challenges in the number of things.
All right, Mr.
But
Tshabalala.
also,
Apologies, I had to jump in there, but we of course would have to bring you in again to continue this conversation. But of course, hang on a little bit. We'll join you in just a few minutes.